I'm going to need to call time. There's lots of good conversation happening around the room, which is always great to see. But it's my pleasure now to introduce our fantastic panel of speakers who are going to be sharing some of their insights on this topic, moving the dial on diversity. So I think Vanessa and I, who jointly run Morgan McKinley, it's a topic very close to our hearts. The last few years, we've actually formalised a programme of work which has included a few sort of specialist workshops to help some of our key clients navigate this and help some of their females in their organisations step up to senior leadership roles. Another part of what we've done is really look at some research pieces, and we actually produced a report earlier this year on why we're not actually seeing some of the tangible results we'd hoped for with all the focus and attention on this topic. So you'll all find a little red Morgan McKinley, which I hope was a credit card. Unfortunately, it's not. But in this little device is a memory stick. So the full copy of the report and some other interesting pieces you'll find on there. And it's my pleasure to now introduce Claire Braund, Executive Director, Women on Boards, who is our chair of the panel today. Claire is a huge advocate in this space and is a real powerhouse and a force to be reckoned with. So I really hand over to you. Thanks, Claire.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much, Louise, and thank you to Morgan McKinley for co-hosting this too. A really great turnout. And to those of you who persuaded your male colleagues to come along as well, fantastic. So really great to see that this conversation, in fact, is becoming one for both genders. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. We have so much to learn from our traditional owners, all of their wisdom which was built up over conversations that took place over many, many thousands of years. And I think sometimes in the pace of change, we forget the importance of discussion, and we forget the importance of conversation, and we forget the importance of meaningful conversation, and how that builds knowledge and how that knowledge adds to what we know today. And so we hope, as part of this panel, that in fact we can have a really meaningful conversation here, because many of you know what the state of play is. We have just come through a month when in fact this very week diversity has been particularly hot topic, with the coalition party room denying the conscience vote. I think that was a shock for a lot of people, and I think that's going to be a topic that does not die, certainly prior to the middle of next year. So that's one. Of course, we had Sharman Stone, the well-known Liberal federal MP, calling for really effectively a quota system within the Liberal Party to say that the representation of women, those standing for safe seats, really, really needs to be pushed up if we are to get a strong voice at the table of where the critical decisions affecting the country are being made. Of course, we've also got Nick Xenophon's bill in Parliament, which is seeking to mandate 40% men and 40% women onto federal government boards. That's going to be interesting. There was 13 submissions, all of them supported it except 2, which were from the ASX and the AICD. The other area in which we have some interesting things happening in Victoria and Queensland, which slipped so terribly in terms of the number of women on boards. Both of those governments have come out very strongly and followed the South Australian position, and in fact looking to mandate 50% of women across their boards. So for those of you who are part of our network, let me tell you, Ruth Med, who's in the room with me today, is being besieged with calls from government. So any of you with strong interests in government board roles or with colleagues in those states, please come in our direction. But women across leadership is so much more than about boards. And for many women, we have not been moving the needle fast. And so it hasn't been shifting. It's been shifting slowly. And particularly for women in those senior roles, people keep on saying, you know, when's it really going to change? When's step change really going to happen? And there's companies who are saying to us, look, guys, we're doing everything, but what more can we do? Well, one of the reasons we've got this panel together is that They are all voices, and they are all people who have achieved real change. They are people who are thinking about some quite disruptive types of innovations and disruptive steps that can be taken. So what we're hoping out of this is, if you can take nothing else, you can scribble on the back of an envelope or on the back of a serviette. Please don't take it with you, it probably would be stealing. However, really what we're looking for is for you to take one or two really good ideas back to your workplace that are practical, that can be implemented, because that's what it's about. So without further ado, I've asked the panel to introduce themselves. I don't like speaking for other people. You often hear so much better stories if they introduce themselves. I've asked them all to talk about their background, their professional experience, and something about them that people might find surprising, something about them that you may not know if you look at their very packaged, polished corporate profile. And we're going to kick off with Rhonda Brighton Hall.
So we're kicking off with the least packaged. I'm Rhonda Brighton Hall. My career has gone from BHP to Cerely, Luxottica to CBA, and now to myself. I have worked in Australia, China, Asia, Europe, and America, but based in Sydney, and a fanatical sailor, if anyone does sailing. And also very pleased to see our netball competition this week, although not on the news, if anyone's noticing
yes.
that. And the World Cup cricket. For women as well. My interesting thing you may not know about me is that I am one of only two corporate people in a massive, big Scottish Presbyterian family. The rest of the family are entrepreneurs or farmers. And so at Christmas time, it's always like, oh, corporate, what, do you go to an office? What's that like? So it's always been a bit of a novelty thing for us to talk about at Christmas time. So.
Thank you, Rhonda. And Kate Aitken.
Hi, my name's Kate Aitken. I work at Goldman Sachs. I've been working at Goldman Sachs for a number of years. I started my career in fixed income, actually on the trading floor as a sales and trader, and then moved into HR. It's a little bit sketchy. Our systems are not so good. 2000, 2001, something like that. And I was in London for the majority of that, and then back here in Australia. Like Rhonda, I guess I have worked in London, I've worked in the US. I live in Sydney, but I do travel an awful lot. So my family is here, my billing address for my credit card is here. But actually I do spend an awful lot more time in airport lounges than I do anywhere else or around the region, which I love. I don't have a particularly interesting story, other than to say when I was very young, my father had an ambition to push a pram around Europe. My mother talked him out of that, and instead we went around Europe in a horse and cart for a year, which the way I draw this back into corporate is that actually it made me, it was interesting times, and we all kind of had to fend for ourselves, and I can pitch a tent and light a fire in the rain. And change a horseshoe.
You are the corporate gypsy.
Absolutely.
John Lydon.
I'm John Lydon. I'm privileged to lead a terrific team of partners at McKinsey in Australia and New Zealand. Probably the least likely managing partner you'll ever see of McKinsey, because I love disrupting this wonderful 50 in Australia 90-year-old institution, right? So it'd surprise you to know 2/3 of what we're doing with our clients right now is new. Didn't have 5 years ago. So we're less the stuffy boardroom advisors. We still do that, but lots of fun, because we believe for Australia to be a prosperous, competitive, productive country, we've got to face some tremendous disruption, and to do that we've got to disrupt our companies, our clients. So that's what we're about. I've been doing that for a year and a half. I've been in Australia since '99. Now I was going to tell you, I'll tell you something I have never told anyone before, apart from my wife. I'll get killed for this, but it's how I became an Australian. And that wasn't when I became a citizen, wasn't even when I started supporting the Aussies rather than the Poms in the cricket, which sadly I do. But no, it was after a year here, supposed to go back to London, and we just couldn't decide, right? So my wife, Carrie, was saying, oh, what should we do? How are we going to decide? We'd like to stay, but, family and all that in the UK. So we actually had a 20-cent piece, which has got the Queen's head on one side, obviously meant go to England, and a platypus on another, right, which obviously meant stay in Australia. So it flips it, it's in the air. Platypus. Now, this is when I knew I was an Australian, because Carrie said, oh, shall we do best out of 3? Now, if I'd have been a sensitive Englishman at that point, I would probably figured out that meant she kind of wanted to go or she wanted to. But I didn't, kept on tossing it, and we got 7 platypus in a row. So that's right, I stayed in Australia. So, okay.
Nice story. Suzanne Young.
I'm Suzanne Young. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the NRL. My kids, I've got 3 boys of my own and 3 stepkids, so 5 boys, 1 girl. And they think this is probably the coolest job that I've ever had. I finally have cred. My previous life, so I joined the NRL in November last year, and prior to that I've had a corporate career through tax. So people say, how did you start off? It's like, yep, tax. So a master's in tax law, worked with Greenwoods and Freehills, and then Unisys, so had an Asia Pacific role, so spent a lot of time travelling and rolling out projects in Asia. And then from there, Qantas, so more finance-based roles, divisional CFO, and then change roles, leading change. Commonwealth Bank, very short stint at Leighton to run a governance project, which really didn't get off the ground. And then spent some time doing consulting before I moved across to the rugby league. Probably something that you don't know about me, I grew up about 8 hours west of Sydney, so out towards sort of halfway to Adelaide, so just near Hay. And one of my passions coming to Sydney was surf lifesaving. And people say to me, how does that work?
The Murrumbidgee.
But certainly through surf lifesaving, I learnt a lot of skills that I've actually applied in my corporate roles. And a lot of that is working with a diverse set of stakeholders and leading teams that you don't pay, and leading an inspiring team. So that's what my passion is.
Thank you. And thank you so much also to Suzanne, who stepped in literally within the last 24 hours for Dave Smith, who is the CEO of the NRL, and equally as delighted to have you here today. So thank you very much for stepping up. Love a country girl. I was born near Hay as well. Okay, we're going to get into it now. You can see that Louise and I, between us, have chosen a pretty good panel that are going to say what they think and know about all this kind of stuff. I'm going to start with Rhonda, because Rhonda is now in the lovely position of, in fact, being a free agent. So she can say lots of stuff, which doesn't work for anyone now. So, what do you think? You've had major roles. You are really deeply embedded in that whole talent, diversity, people, culture kind of stuff. How well do you think we're managing structural change?
It's an awesome question. So let's start the conversation disruptively. That's what we want to be. If the question and the objective of how we're managing talent is that we want to retain society of the 1950s, I think we're doing it brilliantly well. And we will continue to do that well. And that's a flippant answer to a serious question. I think one of the deepest structural influences we have on gender diversity, or on any diversity, is the way that we're approaching talent. And the way we approach talent is a race to find people between the ages of 28 and 35 with high potential, so that we can over-invest in them, over-sponsor them, and give them lots of opportunities. And of course, that age group happens to coincide with when 73% of the Australian population of women have children, and a further 5% go through IVF. So we're not at our sparkly best always in that age period, and that's the period when we're picking our leaders of the future. Now, the reality is that great potential can be 22, great potential can be 52, great potential can be 72, and it doesn't take into account that we are living longer, working longer, and reach our potential and the highlight of our career at very different ages than we're used to in the 1950s. And that's what I would say to the question.
Wow. No disagreement from the panel, I would assume, on that particular question as well. It's really interesting. The age issue is a particularly interesting one. John, are you seeing that come up at all through the McKinsey work around age?
Yeah, No, it's absolutely right. And we see that not just through our research, but in our own firm, that's a critical age. It's a critical age when a lot of our consultants, our women, are going through a global election process. It's incredibly stressful, and we're expecting them to cope with that at the same time, starting a family, having leave. Just not going to work. So when you look at root causes, why women are underrepresented at the top of our firm and the top of most firms, this is the sort of thing that has to change.
You had a divorce while all that happened as well, and a split up, and you had young children, you had twins, you had all sorts going on, and you were a fairly senior role at that time.
Yeah.
How stressful was it from a personal perspective?
There were days where I would take the kids to school and then realised I'd dressed them in the wrong uniform. It was mufti day or sports day or something else. There were days where, even prior to them being in primary school, where I couldn't get the kids into the same childcare centre. So the two childcare centres were half an hour apart. That didn't work so well. And then finally I just threw my hands up in the air and said, I need to get a nanny. That just made life, for me, a lot calmer. But I was really fortunate that I've had some great bosses who have been very flexible. So when I was working for Unisys, an American firm, it was quite funny. When I had the twins, they had paid paternity leave for 2 weeks and unpaid maternity leave for 12 months. And I said, how's that fair? I have to do all the work. So they changed, eventually by the time I had the third child, they changed the policy. So there was 6 weeks paid maternity leave and paid paternity leave as well. So that helped. But I had a great boss who was flexible. I could leave the office at 4:30 every day, get home, feed the kids, bath them, put them to bed, and then I'd log back on again. And they were really flexible with that. So I think having great leaders really helps.
Flexibility is a key issue, and Kate, I know that's something that you're particularly interested in, and it's seen as an absolute key element of the toolkit for managing women and more increasingly for managing men. But what does success really look like for flexible working?
I think ultimately flexibility, I think absolutely, Toronto, to your point, the way that we think about the way we need to work, we all congregate in the same place at the same sort of time, and then we all go, it is really creaking, and I think there's a lot of stuff going on around that. So I personally think that the success factors are that both the organisation and the individual are getting what they want and what they need. And sometimes, like any negotiation, there isn't going to be one single, no one's going to get everything. But if you can get somewhere in the middle, I think everybody's probably doing pretty well. And then, it can swing either way. I think there are formal, flexible working practices and there are informal ones. And I think that actually managers are more empowered than they think to make the informal ones happen. I think, I travel an awful lot. I mean, actually, I work pretty flexibly. And there are times when I am just unavailable because I'm on a plane, and that could be the right time zone for calls in certain places, but the organisation and people can flex and bend, of course they can, based on need and availability, and my availability is based on a whole heap of different things. I'm also a mother of 2 kids, and I have a husband who works and travels and all sorts of other things, and so I recognise that I'm in a senior role, and so people may defer to my diary, and I try very hard for that not to always be the case. And I think a lot of what we're talking about here today is making sure that younger women or women are staying engaged in the workforce through the different stages of their lives. But I do think that having the dialogue where you're having reasonable conversations with your manager and your organisation about what's going to work for everybody is a really important thing. And it's not just the benefits that flow on for the broader group and the broader team, the men and the women. The man who's got 2 dogs who've been locked up inside the house for 12 hours and he needs to get home to let them out. He may be single, or the gay guy who always gets the dud deal because he hasn't got any kids to go home to, so he can stay late and do the work. I mean, I think everybody having conversations about what people's needs and wants are and what the organisation needs and wants is probably the key.
That speaks to your point, Rhonda, which is we need to think about work differently and completely, and that's just not at a structural level, is it? That's at a behavioural level, that's at a cultural level, that's the way we're actually thinking.
It is the longest not had debate. We fundamentally look at work upside down and back to front, and the way that we work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, the history of that is from the 1866 Workingmen's Conference, where they tried to get the cotton mill workers in Manchester to work less hours. And in 2015, we're still thinking that's a good structure. So businesses are now working 7 days a week, they're working 24 hours a day, and we should be looking at work as a division of that 7 days in pieces and work to be done, as opposed to look at a 5-day, 8-hour day. And then what's even worse is this epidemic that's now coming through, which is taking the big jobs out to 7 days a week and saying that's perfectly reasonable. Now, anybody who has children, caring responsibilities, or God forbid, a life, doesn't want to do that. So we have to rethink the way work is built. And then from that, instead of going, all my 5-day-a-week jobs are flexible, you can do them for 3 days and be paid for 3 but do 5 days work effectively. What you're saying instead is, I have a job that takes about 3 days to do, would you like it? I've got another one that's a 2-day-a-week, I've got another one that's 4, what do you think? And I think if we look at work fundamentally differently, we'll be able to do flexibility very differently too.
Thank you, John. That's really interesting because back to that 3, 4, 5-day thing, you've been a little bit disruptive over there, and you've implemented some quite interesting payment systems around those part-time roles.
No, look, that's right. Be careful, any bosses out there. This may get expensive by the end of the story, but it's the right thing to do. So this came, and it's also a story of failure and learning from failure on my part. It came from Male Champions of Change, where I'm really privileged to be a member of that group that Liz Broderick, one of my personal heroes, convenes. And it started when David Thodey said, okay, in Telstra, all roles are flex. And if a manager doesn't think one of their roles is flex, they have to be able to justify why not. But if they can't do that, we assume they all are. So I thought that's a great idea, and Male Champions is about listening and learning, right? So I said, let's do that at McKinsey. So we did it at McKinsey. Guess what? Nobody wanted to do their role flex. I thought, well, there's something deeper going on here, right? Why don't they want to? So we talked to a lot of people, particularly in that 28 to 35, just starting families age group. And they said, look, we're really worried because the workload isn't going to change. We're just going to get paid less. We won't get promoted. We're going to get looked over. We don't get access to the special projects, all that sort of thing. It says, okay, we're going to change the incentives. So from now on, if you're working 3 days a week, we're going to pay you 70%, not 60. If you work 4 days a week, we're going to pay you 90%. You see the thing. I thought, they'll fix it. Still didn't fix it, right? And turned out then, we dug into it a bit more. Why weren't we fixing it? Because, you're going to expect us to work 4.5 days. I said, no, we're not. I said, we don't believe you. And anyway, the clients, right, so we're a client service organisation, the clients don't want part-time people. They want full-time people at their beck and call, they can ring, especially the project manager, right, which is that critical role people do at that age group. So the disruptive thing we then did is to say, right, any client who will take a part-time project manager, they only have to pay for that. We will give them at no cost an additional skilled junior project manager that can be on their team full-time.
So 2 for the price of 1.
2, 1.5 for the price of 1 if you like. But the good thing about that is what we found is, first of all, the person who's working 3 days really does work 3 days because there's someone else there that knows the client, that's trusted by the client on their days off. Second thing it does, it's great development for our people. So imagine you get that apprenticeship of an extra person and it's better service for the client. So sure, it costs us some money, but I think in the long run, it's getting better outcome for our clients, better outcome for our people, so it's got to be a good thing to do.
Fascinating. Kate, thoughts on that?
I think that's amazing. When you said you get 1.5 people, I wonder which one is the 1 and which one is the half. But actually, John and I were just talking about, engaging, Goldman Sachs. We are also a service industry and engaging with your clients as a stakeholder around, we make a lot of assumptions about it. We laugh a little bit about how, for those of you who are clients of investment banks, you get great big pitch books that sort of are a thud, and if you could just turn to page 27 and page 72 and then we'll be done with a 15-minute meeting. I think putting clients at the centre of a lot of these decisions as well is important. And actually, when you enter into that dialogue, clients are managers too, and they have people working for them too, and they have similar challenges as this too. And so actually, again, this kind of recognition about, what's going to work for everybody here? What are the needs? What are the wants? And how do we get the conversation going, I think is important.
And that's hard to have, Suzanne, an organisation like the NRL, which you just informed me takes up, what was it, 22.5% of all of the newspaper space just about every day. I don't read the back page of the Telegraph, I have to confess, that's my sin. However, I believe that this is a very large thing and it occupies, or it sucks a lot of oxygen out of the organisation. It's difficult when you're on the run like that the whole time, isn't it? Which I'm assuming you probably are a bit.
So we're an events business, we're in the entertainment business, so people need to work when we have the event on, when the game's on, or an associated event around the game. So we try to be then flexible with our staff in relation to them managing their time. We're putting our first formal flexible working policy in place because they've never had one before. But then we've also provided to staff additional days off in recognition that they're working these sort of extended hours, extended periods of time. Because we know that they have families, they need support, they have other interests outside of work, and we can be quite limited given that we run, a big entertainment and events business. So it does take some juggling for people, but this is probably no different to many other people who are juggling different things required or clients, etc. But they have to be flexible. So trying to get people to take control themselves.
And Dave Smith's been quite strong on the whole gender balance area, hasn't he? Dave Smith, for those of you who don't know, is a former banker who came into the NRL in 2012.
Yes.
And he earlier this year mandated, in fact, that he thinks every NRL club should have at least one woman on the board, or they might be asked some questions about governance, about diversity, about, in fact, even indeed funding, which is always a nice lever to pull. How's that going?
It's fantastic. So we had only last month our first Women on Boards in Rugby League dinner, where we brought all of the women together and including some associated organisations, so Men of League, which is its own board, and it has a woman on the board, so we had her as well, plus, and the CEO, who's also female for that organisation, plus our Indigenous board, Linda Burney, is the chair of the Indigenous board, so she was there as well. Myself from Rugby League, Raylene Castle, who's a CEO of a rugby league club, so sort of the top tier. Bring them all together, not just to network, but to work out what are the big issues in rugby league that we want to have influence on. And that's the plan for that group. In addition to that, we have a Women in League now subcommittee, which has got women and men on it. From states, from clubs, we've got fans on there, women and men who want to make a difference in this space. So we're focused on our fans and our members, on growing participation, on advocacy, so increasing advocacy around rugby league and all the wonderful things that it does that lots of people don't know about, and then growing talent. And it won't be growing just female talent.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter to have more women in what is, if you believe the footy show, a very blokey game? I have a personal campaign to get rid of the footy show.
That's exactly Claire why it matters. So, even, my first week in the role, there was a bit of a storm in a teacup about my appointment because I hadn't played rugby league, even though I did tell them that I broke my nose when I was about 10 playing rugby league, because I went to a primary school that had 15 kids and you played every sport at lunchtime if you wanted to play sport. But it matters because the culture does need to change. That first week, I got a tweet that first week, who did you sleep with to get this job? It's just that sort of stuff cannot be where Australia is at. It has to change. And, I certainly that week had to sit the kids down and say, look, just because they write it doesn't mean it's true. But that's hard for kids to hear. There's been worse. It's hard for kids to understand when that's your mum and, they love you and they don't want those sort of things, someone telling them in the school ground that someone's written that about you. So it's just, that has to change. We have to be more inclusive. We know that as a game. We know that if we're more inclusive for women and kids and different cultures, our game is going to be stronger, our clubs are going to be stronger, and that will allow us to do more, and we need to take a stand on that.
John, are you seeing, I think quite often you see a difference between the way corporates are handling things and the way clubs, the way bigger not-for-profits and those kind of things. You probably get a nice flavour of what's going on because you work with so many different companies. Do you think enough is being done? Where are the pockets of good progress and where are we perhaps lagging?
Well, I think as Winston Churchill said, I'm an optimist. There really doesn't seem much point in being anything else. and I'm an optimist too. So I probably do get a bit of a biased view because of the companies we work with. We self-select a little bit. We want to work with the leaders. Things like male champions give me exposure to people who get it. But I am seeing progress. There's a but. I'll come to that. Why am I seeing progress? Because lots of just about every corporate has bold targets that they need to do better. They are taking initiatives, right? Whether that is making sure there's 50-50 or better on shortlists, whether that's the all roles flex, whether that's just symbolic sponsorship, mentoring in their organisations that filters down. There's a lot going on and a lot being done. Here's the but though. This is an immense cultural change that's needed in our organisations in Australia. And we study this a lot, all types of cultural change, whether it's the way you do your operations or your marketing or your strategy. 2/3, 3/4 of them fail. That's a fact, right? 2/3 of these changes people set out on actually fail. And it's going to be no different. We've got to appreciate how hard this is. And we have to explicitly change things and disrupt things. Because if we don't, the system, and it's about the system, I think in the Morgan McKinley report it was quite good, this is not changing women, this is changing the system. If we don't explicitly include women, then the system will just, naturally exclude them. That's not right. So I'm seeing a lot of change, seeing a lot of actions. Actions aren't enough. We need real conscious effort at all levels of a company on the cultural change, the capabilities, the incentives, the role modelling that goes on if we're really going to turn the tide here.
Rhonda, are we seeing that deep cultural change going on? You talk with a lot of people, you're probably talking with a lot more people now. What's your intrinsic thoughts about this, how we're going?
I think I'm eternally optimistic, so I like the fact. I think the people who are moving this agenda forward are optimistic. If you just get outraged, it's awesome with a glass of red wine, but doesn't do much. So you've got to really do something. I think the changes that are coming through will now be helped by a couple of angles. The first thing, the ageing population cliff that we've now hit will give us the same emphasis that the war gave us in terms of saying we need more people contributing, there's not enough of us and we need to work longer. And all of a sudden groups that we've sidelined, like women, like people with profound disability, will have to come into the workforce because otherwise we will not have a sustainable economy. So that's going to help us. The second thing is a social change where men are now assuming that their partner will want a career. Women are now assuming that their husband or partner will want to be a role in parenting. However the family comes together, single parent, traditional family, same-sex family, doesn't matter. Those families are all saying we want different flexibility and it's individual. That social change is now so loud, as we've seen this week, that we're starting to go, the rules changed. And when the rules change, I think we've got an opportunity to really do deep social change, and that's where we're up to. But we do need to understand that things like, and the biggest example that's been very topical is equal pay, is that the law around equal pay has been live in New South Wales, for example, since 1958. So we can't come into this problem with a smugness and say, now that we're here, it's easy and you just get outraged and do this. It's not going to be easy. There's really smart people who've been trying to solve this problem for 70 plus years. And if we're going to solve it, we're going to need to think deeply, systemically, structurally about everything that needs to change. Policy, aggregate exposure, data, and also the micro level when you look at an actual example where pay is not right and saying, why is that so? And those three levels need to come together at the same time. It's very hard, but it's absolutely worth doing because otherwise we will stay stuck in the society that we're stuck with today.
Kate, investment banking, is it up for that kind of change, do you think?
I actually think investment banking is actually not too bad. And when we look at the data, we're sort of all in the same boat together, I guess. But certainly the issue isn't really at entry level. It's really more about who's in what jobs, and that's where there is that exposure. It's very rarely, certainly in our own organisation, you've got two people doing the same thing who are paid differently. But the question is who's got the sexy job that gets paid a lot of money, and whether or not what are the barriers for that to be a woman in there. So, certainly in our organisation, we spend an awful lot of time picking through, the numbers, and I've got a level of confidence around that. But the broader issue is who's in the jobs where the big tickets are, and that's all these things that we're talking about. We're talking about here today, and pipeline and keeping people engaged. And if it was, if there was only one thing we needed to do, we would have done it. Actually, I like to think we would have. But it's actually everything, and none of it has its own momentum. You have to do it all. You have to focus on your campus. You have to focus on this. And you can't take your eye off the ball. One thing I'd add to Rhonda's comments, and Claire, you and I touched on this the other day about, there's a little bit of a pincer effect, I think, happening where, millennials, and I'm not one to buy too much into the generational kind of piece, but are demanding the sorts of things that, quite frankly, I want to work in that workplace too. And I think that it's a workplace where people are measured on output, and there is flexibility and a mature approach to, well, I don't really mind where you do it, but you just get it done. And actually, it's really important to me that I create space for my volunteer work or whatever it may be in that kind of younger generation. I mean, I can't think of a reason why anybody would not want to work like that, no matter what generation you are, no matter what your life circumstances are. So certainly in our organisation, where we agonise over, and compete with people like McKinsey for the best and the brightest that come out of universities, the ask and the expectation about what they want from us as a workplace, the bar is going up. And we are being forced to change from a bottoms-up effect as well as a kind of top. So pleasingly, the pressure is coming from everywhere, which is certainly sharpening people's minds to it.
Okay, sharpen your own minds for a couple of questions that you might ask. I'm just going to lead in with one, because Rhonda touched on that really, really critical issue, which was the gender pay gap. And you've actually, the root cause of that, Rhonda, you've got an interesting case study that you might speak to about how you can get to the root cause of it, because so many people are saying, look, we're looking at it this way and that way, and we're lying on the ground, and we're looking up at it, and we're looking sideways, and we're looking backwards, and we're looking frontwards, and it's still there and we can't work it out. And we're all pretty good at maths here. So the question is what's the root cause, and how do we do something about it?
First of all, it's a global phenomenon. So
yes.
I've had an example that is exactly the same in two different countries. So let me use that example. Graduates come in. They're on a set pay scale, and they have set rotations for the first year, and there are no salary changes in that year, okay? And at the end of the year, the guys are paid between 8 and 10% more than the women. And we go, that's illogical. So then we say, those guys, that's what it is, they're bloody negotiating. We need to get the women negotiating. So now we've got this group of women, and we get them in a class, we go, you've got to stand up straight, be negotiable, get out there, get your pay. Now they're an annoying group of graduates, because before they were really good, and now they're asking for pay. But there's a different way of looking at it and saying, if there wasn't a salary review, how did the guys get the pay? Now, we can assume that they're great negotiators, but if you see a group of great graduates together, they're all very good. It's not like the guys are great and the girls aren't. It's not like that. They're all good. So what is it? So what we actually did was we spoke to the guys and said, how did you get more pay? That was a simple question. And they didn't get it by negotiating. They said, I didn't ask for it. What happened is I was doing my job. My boss gave me a bit extra to do. I said, thanks very much, and I worked really hard, and he or she gave me more pay for it. And we thought, well, that's a really remarkable story. They just get paid because their boss is giving it to them, well-intentioned to give them more money for more effort. Then we went to the bosses. Now, who are the people that manage graduates? They're not the CEO. They're second, third tier managers who've often got one or two people working for them, that's all. 1 foot in the leadership classroom at the moment, not really started on that journey. Got them together and said, one by one, why did you give this person pay? And because it ends up the guys get the pay. And their answer was, they were working really hard and I wanted to do the right thing. And we thought, okay. And why didn't you do it for the women? So we looked at the other side of it. And the answer was that a lot of the guys in those jobs, and often the bosses were guys because the percentage is higher still, actually had come from, and I know this is outrageous and everyone will get upset, but it was the fact, is they had come from private boys' schools. They weren't used to working with women. They were a little bit embarrassed. They didn't form the same on-work colleague relationship that early in their career. They're still finding their feet as a leader of all diversity. And as a consequence, they accidentally gave it to the guys because they had a greater affinity. And then when you say to them, you need to put a lens over every time you're doing pay, men and women, they go, of course, now I get it. So you've given me the tool. I'm a well-intentioned, value-driven person. I want to do the right thing, which is most of us. And then they turn around 12 months later and those exact people had done the right thing and we held it in the second year. And that's a micro example of how to hold pay correctly by giving the information to the decision makers, which aren't necessarily at the top of the tree, on stage. They're down in the organisation and they want the information. If you give it to them, they can hold a social decision.
Wow. John.
Just on the pay gap as well, so again, something we're really concerned about. So we agree absolutely with that, right? And was another even more insidious thing we were seeing going on, is that, and this will be true, I think, for everyone here who manages people. I want you to reflect on it. Another reason for the pay gap is that women are not progressing as fast through the ranks in their careers, and often because they're taking either part-time, parental breaks, much more than men. And as a result, right, they don't get promoted as soon or as often or as much. And then if you add up a lifetime of earnings, that's one of the reasons why over a lifetime they're going to earn less, retire with much less in super funds, all those things we hear about. One thing you can all do, and because we started having amazing results, is completely disregard your tenure in your role when you're choosing people to promote. And just regard the skills, the impact, the track record demonstrated. If you just do that, it just sometimes means taking those years of service off the form or off the system, as simple as that, and just looking at the person, their achievements, their capabilities. I think you'll find you'll start to promote more women. It'll just start to happen. That's a challenge for everyone out there.
Suzanne?
Two personal reflections. I think one, all that you have said, and then add to that sometimes when you're going for roles, you're asked, what is your existing salary? So for women, if they've had these part-time roles, interrupted career and lower salaries because they haven't progressed as far, when they're going for that stretch role, they're being asked what their existing salary is, and then they go, gosh, I got a good deal on that, didn't I? And I've had someone, a partner in another firm say, love hiring women because you can get them cheap. And I just said, that is not cool. That's not acceptable. And then I've had a personal situation in a role where I stepped up and did additional work, as did one of my male colleagues, and I found out that he'd been offered a stepping up allowance and I wasn't. And so I went in and said, okay, what about this? So asked for it, and it could be for the same reasons that you're talking about, that they just felt more comfortable. Well, he's stepping up, and we'll offer him some more money. And when I asked for it, the gentleman said, "I'm really sorry you had to ask. I should have thought of it." So it's kind of a mixture of those situations, but I think that needs, it definitely needs to change.
Okay, some great reflections there on the gender pay gap, which we all need to be mindful of and looking out for. Task for everybody in the room, note to self. Okay, questions? Anyone got a question? I think we've got a couple of microphones. Have we got a couple of microphones in the room? Can somebody wave at me? Oh yes, the kind gentleman there. You're going to have to be running very fast. I hope you're feeling terribly fit. Anyone got a question that I can see? Yes, down in the corner down here. We've got one down there. Down on your right, my left. Put your hand up again so the gentleman can see you. Down on the back table there near where the waiter is. Yes, thank you. If you can just say your name and where you're from, or give a little bit of context, that'd be fabulous.
To the panel, thank you very much for today. My name's Jenny Devine. I'm from TaxScope and I specialise in tax. The comments from the Liberal Party about merit, and we can see the results of apparently merit-based promotion within that party. When we look at a lot of females, they've had years out bringing up a family for which they will never be given official recognition. But for most parents, their skill sets, their ability to lead a range of people, even when they're screaming on the floor, it increases dramatically. So in a corporate context, how do we start to redefine what merit is, because it's also personal characteristics which are going to help bring an organisation forward?
An excellent question. Thank you very much. Rhonda, I'm going to ask you to kick off with that. It's a really thorny question, dear old merit.
Because there's two sides to what you just asked. So the first thing is meritocracy requires exceptional leadership. And in most organisations, even really great organisations, and there are many of them, you don't consistently get great leadership. You get good leadership, great leadership, bad leadership, and everything in between. And so merit is, by definition, as good as the leader. And if the leader can't do it that way, and they're not looking at outcomes, they're not looking at measurements, they're just waiting for self-promotion, whatever it happens to be. So leadership is one part of that answer. And so maybe, I'm very apolitical, but maybe the Liberal Party could look there. Am I allowed to say?
Yes, say what you like.
Okay, the second part to it is when you look at the differences between men and women, and there's a rising tide of conversation around this, is that there is value, exactly as you've described, on the role that many women play, 73% of us, to child caring, or whether it be elder parent caring, that we shoulder the burden of that, or the joy of it, whichever way you want to look at it. And that is worth something. It is a valuable skill set. It is a valuable life experience that should be recognised as part of the whole person that comes to work. And that's been a missing piece. And at the moment, we've got people like, I had a conversation with Barbara Kellerman, who's been an outspoken advocate for about 40 years on this topic. And she said, I am never writing on gender diversity again, not until we accept there's a physiological difference between men and women, and it's valuable to be a woman. And I thought, yeah, bring it on. This is a good conversation.
Other comments? Kate?
I absolutely agree with Rhonda. We've done a lot of work. My CEO, Simon Rothery, is also a Male Champions of Change, and we did quite a bit of work around the role of the leader and the impact, the shadow that a leader can cast across a range of things. And I agree with you. Great organisations have a full range of leaders, and the influence that they have is not insignificant on an individual and a broader basis. I think that's right. Life experience, of course, is important. We do, when I say we, I'm sure all of us, when we're thinking about people, we bring our whole selves to work. We bring our surf life saving experience, our sailing experience, our child rearing experience. And my husband brings his, part-time single parent experience to work every day as well. So I think, getting beyond this, what measuring, what school did you go to, these sorts of things, particularly the more senior you get, is key. But it's not easy, especially if you're an unknown walking into a new job without any equity in an organisation, and it's very hard to convey that. But I think if we can crack that, we'll be on the way.
So, John, why aren't we more Scandinavian in our approach and value parenting and value, in fact, the Business Council wants more and more skilled workers. So the two great things you do for your country is you work and you have kids, which are future little tax-paying units when you think about it. So why don't we make those two concepts mutually inclusive? And what are the barriers in organisations that are in fact preventing that kind of thinking?
And you're right to mention Scandinavia as a case study. If I look at Sweden, I look at Norway, that give a year's parental leave shared between parents, all paid, which we've started doing, by the way, as well now. Males absolutely can access father's parental leave as well. But if you look at Norway, Sweden, they are at the top of the charts for gender diversity on their executive teams. They are at the top of the charts for above median earnings in those companies. So we can learn. But what are the barriers? Now, I'll tell you a story, a bit of failure on our part that we learned from as well. So, McKinsey's a values-driven thing. We've had the same values 90 years, and one of them is a caring meritocracy. So, of course, we're going to do all this on merit, and of course we'll include life skills in parenting. It's just what we are, and that's what I thought, but it's not the case. And why wasn't it the case? It's because of what I call unconscious bias. And well-intentioned leaders, that want to be merit-based and want to cover all life skills and the outcome you get, not just how you demonstrate it. They want to do that, but there is a natural human bias that we look at things that we want people to be like us. We want people to succeed the way we succeeded. We want people to learn from us as leaders. And, you know, it's a fact, right? This bias, I guess everyone in the room, me too, is going to have these unconscious biases, and you have to consciously do something about it. Otherwise, they are going to creep into those evaluation processes. And we audited, we looked for the language, actually analysed the language, and we found that people were saying things like, oh, but, you know, can she go toe-to-toe with a hostile CEO? Does she have command of an audience? Right? So what's that about? So stop, right? And now we have explicit roles in our people discussions reviews that call out stop, because you know what? You may not need to go hostile toe-to-toe, toe-to-toe with a hostile CEO. If you're used to getting a 9-year-old to get dressed for school and actually put them, it's probably a better skill that's going to help you there. And it's thinking about the outcomes that you get, and how you get those outcomes can draw on life skills. So again, it was a huge move for us. It took a lot of effort from people who thought they were getting it right. So boy, we've got a long way to go. Unconscious biases, get conscious about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And in big organisations, you were at Qantas for quite a long time, they get embedded sometimes, don't they, within particular areas, and it's difficult to get them out.
And I think to that point as well, there's that UN paper now on the falseness of merit-based recruitment, because it talks about the Howard and Heidi study, where exactly the same resume but with a different name on it, and the name that got picked out more was Howard. And then the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, when they shifted to blind auditions, they shifted their recruitment of women from 10% to 45%. And I mean, it's real. But by talking about it and exposing people through all levels of the organisation to the fact that it exists, you would hope that it has to change. And I think that all of us that have children as well, that we can support them to look at the world through a different lens and have different expectations. I certainly know with the kids from a very early age, the boys know how to stack the dishwasher, do their washing, iron their clothes, help with the cooking. So they've grown up in an environment where, it was a practical consideration on my part. I just knew I wasn't Superwoman. But, they've grown up in an environment where this is all just normal. And we need to make that happen for the next generation.
It's an interesting comment, because anyone who's any doubt about this, please get Annabelle Crabb's book, which is Subtitles Why Women Need a Wife and Men Need a Life, because it's got some very interesting stats on, in fact, the most marketable commodity in the workplace is the married man. And absolutely, she went back to the ABS and looked at all of the data, and married men get more jobs. Single men are a bit more of a risk, but married men are the most marketable kind of commodity. So if you're in that stat and you're in that 30 to 45 age group and you're a bloke, you're a pretty marketable kind of commodity, because you're safe as well as being, good at your job. But anyway, there's some very interesting stats in that particular book. And if anyone's read The Weekend Australian, the magic number 7, the woman Karen Miller, who's been blogging a whole lot on this particular topic, she's been talking about how if you're 10, you're just too hot, and therefore you're too hot to handle, basically, and you can't be put in front of clients as a female, because everyone's going to be thinking about wanting to sleep with you, right? And so then she says you can't be ugly or you're in the back office. Yeah. And she did a whole study across, I think it was JP Morgan, about 20 years ago on this, looking at this particular phenomenon. Get The Weekend Australian, I'm just quoting. So anyway, the really great thing, if you're a 7, that's a big tick for the business world. So hilarity aside, it's quite a real study. Further questions on these topics? Yes, down here, just down the front down here. On that. Did you read the article? It was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating. It was very interesting, yes.
Hi, I'm Elif. I'm with the commercial strategy team at Optus. My question is around the gender diversity across different departments in the workforce. I work closely with finance, and when we do our meetings, I'm usually the only female in the room. So, and we all know that there's a concept called being a numbers guy, but I've never really heard the concept of being a numbers woman or a numbers, girl. And people get quite often surprised when they figure out that I've got an engineering degree and I've got programming skills, but I can also, dress up and look nice and just, hold a conversation. How do you propose to tackle this problem, and how can we incentivize more involvement from the female side across these departments?
Okay, we might take our finance person and then flick to Rhonda on that one as well. Kate, you were in finance, you know that game.
Well, I'm not an engineer and I can't code anything. I can't change the time on my microwave. Look, we spend a lot of time on campuses, and when I think about our pipeline, our talent, that's automatically kind of where I go to. And I think if there's anybody in education here, I think there aren't as many women in STEM anyway. And so then we go back to high school and why not, and and so on and so on. So, I think in part there's a pipeline issue there as well about kind of where are the women coming through there, and so it may be a little while longer before you're a majority in that room. But I think for the lawyers amongst us, where I think for some time now more women have been graduating as lawyers than men, that's changing. And I certainly have got friends and colleagues in some of these law firms where actually it's becoming really a much bigger issue much quicker in law firms than it is certainly in my industry, because actually that's the majority of the workforce and they are knocking on the door of the partnership. So, I don't think there is an easy fix. I think, we often in our industry are sort of like, well, the 20-year investment banker, where is she? And we actually all know where they are, and the minute that she looks like she wants to change jobs, we're all over it. And as are our competitors on ours as well. So there is a pipeline issue, and I think there is a staying and retaining issue. There is a, why aren't girls doing the STEM subjects early on in their career? I'm optimistic about Optus that they are not choosing women who are smart finance people, I'm imagining. I'm hoping that it is a bit more merit-based than that. I'm confident that it would be, but I do think there's all sorts of issues around that would drive that. But stick with it. You'll find something. Maybe go and make sure you're going to universities and high schools and talking to your friends about doing STEM subjects early, because it's a big issue in technology as well. I mean, technology industry there's not enough women there. We do a lot of work around girls who code. We do a lot of interesting stuff to try and get the girls in, particularly in high school. But I think it's a pipeline thing as much as anything else.
Rhonda, you did a bit of that too, didn't you?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversations about boys versus girls' brains, and you can find a study to agree with whatever you want to say. But generally it's accepted that, say, things like perceptual reasoning and the things that would be the fundamental, numerics and things before STEM skills, that the difference between men and women is about 4% at the median. So if you draw two big normal curves, there's still a big slab of women who can do it brilliantly. So we're not talking about, girls are down here and there's the guys. It's so close, like they almost overlap. So that's not the solution. It's happening before they leave school. And then I've got two daughters, 16 and 18, and my eldest daughter did her career conversation. And this career teacher, I had to go up and have a coaching conversation with him because he suggested to her that because of her great love of science and medicine that she would be an awesome nurse. Now, I think she probably would be an awesome nurse. She's a very caring person, but as it turns out, she's lucked it in and studying medicine, so good luck. But that's the conversation in a career when you've got a very smart young woman who's very sciencey in front of you. There's a massive social pressure to go, let's do the caring jobs. And not that doctors shouldn't care too, but that's a different conversation. So there's that part of it. And then when we get into STEM, I mean, those estimates that are coming through on STEM are so massive that we have to solve this right back into primary school. And I think that it's been flagged now really, really loudly. We've currently got 16% of our population studying STEM subjects. We need it to be in the 60s in the next 10 years, and the highest in the world is 50, and we're 16, so we're really behind the 8 ball in this one. So it is about getting girls who have got the smarts to do that work really young and not farming them towards the girl stuff. And I think that's going to be part of the solution.
Women, as a corollary, don't go into these subjects because we're talking about leadership and we're talking about hierarchical versus collective leadership styles, and we were talking about women intrinsically quite often being good at those collective leadership kind of sort of models. Do you think it's the perception of what a career in some of those areas looks like that is turning them off, or what do you think it is? Because it's not an academic issue.
Well, I think a lot of businesses are run by people who didn't go through science, so you're going to be unique. They're often through law or through finance or accounting, etc., so the humanities. If you get the people in science, what science is now training people to do, and I think their lessons of leadership are going to be really valuable to us, because they're saying that for you to be a great doctor or a great scientist, you will know 10% of what you need to know, and you're going to need 9 very smart friends working with you and collaborating to get your job done. And I think management and leadership in business is the same, but we don't look at it like that. We're still training people to stand on stage with poise and wave their arms the right way and speak loudly and be forthright and have executive presence and all this stuff that doesn't matter a hoot about anything. And we should be thinking about what is the impact of a leader on others? What is their impact on a collaborative group, collective leadership? That mindset change on what is a great leader will play into people who have feminine leadership skills, not just women, but men as well. I think it's going to be fantastic.
John, you can see...
No, it's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I love, because finance these days, it's not just about doing the numbers, right? It's about influencing change. It's about collaboration, problem solving, all those things women are actually quite good at, right? But here's something, I'm all about practical actions. Here's something you can all do. Tell you what, I got a female CFO, and since we appointed Isabel, who's terrific, best candidate, we've now got 3 more women joining our finance team. But why? How did that happen? Well, because we've got something in the male champions that you can all do, and it's called 50-50, if not, why not? When you get a shortlist for one of these roles, even if it is an area where women are underrepresented in the graduate population or whatever, you've got to say to your recruiter, you've got to say to your HR department, 50-50 on the shortlist, men and women. If not, you've got to give me a really good reason why there are not women out there that make this shortlist. Go and look again. And that's what we did. And it's amazing, because then you will find the women are there. They may not be putting themselves forward. They may not be emphasising those other skills they bring. But once they get on the shortlist, you hire them because they're the best candidate. And once they're in the role, they become role models for other people to come through. So I'm going to say, everybody, you'll all be recruiting people, looking at lists of CVs, whatever role it's for, 50-50. If not, ask why not.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the original conversation on talent management, it is in this definition of what is talent, what is potential, what is leadership. And exactly what John's saying, I think that's going to be the secret, is to say not what does it look like and are they tall or whatever rubbish we've always gone about, but actually to say what is this person's impact on the people who follow them? Are the people doing better? Is the business doing better? Is the group, the team, the clients, the customers, is everybody doing better on this person's watch or not? And measure that person on their impact and not on them, which is how we've traditionally looked at it.
Suzanne, a CEO of the Melbourne Storm, several CEOs ago, I have to point out, because there's been a bit of a rotating door there, said the great thing that he learned was to fire fast and hire slowly, because he was hiring at the time for a CFO for the organisation, I think a CFO and a COO, and they had a whole lot of applicants, and they had 250 applicants because all the blokes and everybody wanted to be the CFO for the Melbourne Storm. And he said he had his top 12, and interestingly there was about 6 men grouped at the top, but he did a really slow process, and he did about 3 to 4 rounds of interviews, and then he did some checking, and then he did all sorts of things. And he said it was actually fascinating to watch the weightings change and to watch that shift. And he wound up with a woman in the top CFO job and the woman in the top COO job who had not been the loudest, not made the biggest claims, but he said it was his great learning was to hire slowly. And I'm wondering whether that's something that flows through. We often do things very quickly and we sort of have it all and we tick it all off, and we don't allow those natural processes to actually happen.
Yes, and to not always be the loudest or the tallest, or those things that are looked at quickly. Oh yes, that fits and I feel comfortable hiring this person because they're kind of like me. There is a female, I'm mentoring the female CFO for the Melbourne Storm, so you'll be pleased to know we do have a female in that role. But I also think it's really important that we hold the recruitment agents that we're using, if that's internal or external, that we hold them accountable. So we certainly got some feedback for a role that we were hiring through the marketplace, never a good place to get negative feedback from, that the recruiter had said something along the lines of, we know you don't want a girl for this role. Girl, or female or woman, but still, to get that back from the market, we said, well, why would you make that assumption? Oh, well, because it's the NRL. And I was like, yeah, but I'm at the NRL. And probably 50% of our team in our head office is female. And people were surprised by that fact. So I think holding both the leadership accountable, but also the people that we are sourcing candidates through, holding them accountable for the language that they use and their processes is really important.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes, one, there's a couple over here. We might go over to the far fireplace in the corner over there. Sorry, to give you extra walking. Very good. There we are, thank you.
I'm Stephanie, I'm from CBA representing table 40, we're the singles table. This one for Susan. It's a natural reaction for women that face adversity through their life, whether it's in their job or at home or family or money or whatever, to actually call it and say, you know what, it's just not worth it, it's not worth the fight. Mm-hmm. I think, including myself, it's one thing that stood out when you were talking about your role. Where is your strength coming from for you to continue in this adverse role?
Oh, great question, thank you.
I think probably if I start with two things. One, I don't like being told I can't do something. It's just a fundamental part of who I am. So my grandfather probably instilled that in me from a very young age. When people would say, no, you can't do that. I remember him saying, well, why not? Yes, you can. And that gave me a strong, I guess, personal foundation of standing up for myself and what I wanted. And then probably when I was at Unisys, I was in, I'd had the kids and I was in it was a challenging time. I was going through divorce. But I read a Harvard Business Review article which talked about men being confident to apply for roles where they had 50 or 60% of the skills required, maybe it was a bit less, and females applying for roles where they had, they were able to tick off experience in 90%, something around that. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to allow that to be me. I'm not going to limit my career by the fact that I'm naturally very risk adverse, but I'm going to take some chances and push myself to grow and to learn and to go into uncomfortable roles. And I've been fortunate to have some fantastic leaders who I've worked for, one in particular at Qantas, Peter Gregg, who one day called me up to his office and said, yes, you're ready to move roles. Here's 3 roles. Which one do you want to do? And I said, which one do you want me to do? Because I knew there would be one that he was more in favour of. And he chose the one that I really didn't want to do because it was the hardest. And I said, yeah, well, that could, it's got high risk. And he said, yep, high risk, high reward. And so I took that role on, not knowing how the hell I was going to learn how to do it, but took it on and with his support worked my way through it and surrounded myself with good people, because I didn't know how to do it. And we got it done, and then I got promoted into something else that I didn't know how to do. But having, that sort of self-confidence to say, I'll work it out, and backing yourself, I think is really important. Now I would say probably the biggest support that I have, the kids are fantastic. John, my partner's fantastic. And so when I have bad days, and I do, he just occasionally said, although I did say to him I had a bit of a meltdown last Friday, and it was just like a big day, a big week, and I said, sometimes I actually don't need you to solve the problem, I just need some empathy. So we went out to dinner, all good, but I think having a support network, your girlfriends, your family, that you can bounce that off and just go, not every day is going to be roses. It's just not. Having the resilience then to pick yourself up the next day and go back in there and do the right thing, I think that's really important.
I think that's a key word, Kate, that I often think that it is a really key thing, and I worry sometimes that sometimes younger women don't have it, as the mother of a 10-year-old daughter also. And my constant mantra is we don't use the word can't in our house, so I just pretend I'm deaf when it happens and I can't hear it. But the thing is, it really can be, we really need to, that resilience factor is something that really has to happen. Do you see that through your organisation?
Yeah, look, we do, and I see it in increasingly young women actually coming in and wanting to know, how do you do it? And, making decisions about something that may or may not actually happen. And making assumptions about things that may or may not happen. And so I admire that these young women are thinking so far ahead, although I'm not sure that it's serving all of the purposes. I think if I'd probably be like you, Suzanne, if I kind of knew what I know now, maybe I might have made different decisions, but it wouldn't have worked out the way it has. So, I think the thing that I sort of say to a lot of these young women is that, look, actually it is hard. I wasn't always a managing director at Goldman Sachs. I've had my kids longer than I've been in this sort of role, and like you, we've had disasters with daycare, and do you know what I mean? But it's hard for my husband too, and maybe there's a little bit in here around if there's not enough role models around and not enough women coming and going, oh my God, what happened to you between 6 and 8 o'clock this morning? Because here's what happened to me. And maybe we don't do enough of that in sharing the war stories, but it's worth it. Staying the course is absolutely worth it for you, for your life, for your family, for your children, if you have them or not. But I think this kind of idea that somehow it's easier to not be engaged in your career or not taking risks is somehow better. I really struggle with how that plays into a prosperous retirement, self-directed, I struggle with that a lot, and so I sort of, if anything, stay the course. Maybe you need to slightly adjust at different times of your life to do different things, which brings us back to our original flexibility conversation, but I think opting out just doesn't seem to me like the right thing. Find people to talk to, find some kindred spirits. There's lots of different ways of doing it.
Other questions? Thank you. There was one in the middle, and then we're going to go down the front. To the middle table there, where's my gentleman with the microphone? Oh, there you are. Yep. Okay, if you can come to the middle table there, please, just behind 11. And then we'll come down the front here for the microphone here. Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much. My name's Deanna Varga. I'm on one of the only females on an executive of 5 at the Australian National Maritime Museum. I'm going to ask the panel to make a comment on a statement, and I appreciate my statement is a little bit controversial. I'm a female who's chosen not to have children, and in a lot of the conversations that I hear about diversity, there is a very big sway, naturally, to people who've made the choice to have children, and therefore their reason for not progressing is around family breaks or breaks around that nature. Adding to that, a woman who is ambitious and driven, going back to some of the comments the panel has already made about if you do blind testing, a woman who is ambitious is seen as aggressive, expletive, and a man is seen differently. So just a comment about diversity, if we took the parenting argument out of it, where does diversity sit?
Rhonda, I'm going to ask you this question because you've managed a lot of this area.
Yeah. So the reality is that if you look at most senior women, is that the stats are about 50% of them have children and 50% don't. So that means that the first 50% that don't have children, women, actually come from 22% of the population who choose not to have children. So it's a small group and they're representing a lot of senior roles. So the odds and stats are stacked against women with children, which is why people go to that debate. Now, having said that, there's a massive part of this social change, which, when I mentioned before about social change as a friend to us at the moment, is that there are women who have chosen not to have children or haven't had children, and men who've chosen not to have children or haven't had children. And in those groups, those people are still saying, but I have a life. And as a consequence, that the exodus of women in particular from corporate roles because of the way work is structured inside corporate environments in the ages of 45 plus at the moment is absolutely extraordinary. And I think that will be another social change when people, for whatever reason, children, no children, whatever, life, are saying, I choose not to work a 7-day week. And that will change the way we have to look at work. So I think that it isn't just about women with children. It is about people with other things in their life other than work, although work is an important part and that's where ambition comes in. If you go back to where we choose our roles, and we go back right to gender schemas from our childhoods, which we've all got, it just depends how you grew up with that mindset. I grew up in a single parent family with just a mum. She was an awesome mum doing 2 jobs. And as a consequence, I got that women did everything. They mowed the lawn, they made dinner, and we helped. That's how life worked. I married a guy who grew up with just a dad, and he was the same. We divide up the jobs in our house based on who wants to do them and can be bothered. And that's it. And it's not very hard, So if we start to think differently about the homework as well as the work, I think that's another gold mine of opportunity where we can divide it up differently.
Okay, question.
Sorry,
John, add on to that.
This is such an important question. And it's where what I talked about a bit earlier, unconscious bias really raises its ugly head, right? Where you've got an ambitious, talented woman that somehow finds it difficult to progress in their career, and there's no children, even bad reasons don't exist, right? So why is that? And when we look at that, we say unconscious bias. And there's a test, and this surprised me. I'm going to do it with you if we've got like 30 seconds. A Boston radio station, some of you will know this, so don't give it away if you know it, posed this riddle to their listeners. A father and his son were in a car accident. Right? The father was killed instantly. The son was rushed to hospital in the operating room. The surgeon came in, said, I can't operate on that child. He's my son. So what was going on, right? And I'm sure an enlightened audience like you guys will get this immediately, but what shocked me was on that Boston radio station, the first 10 callers said things like, maybe he didn't really die, right? Maybe it was the grandfather. Maybe he was actually reincarnated because he was meant to save his son. They all thought, clearly, the surgeon must be a man because, of course, it was his mother. And I hope you all got that. If you didn't, then you need to think about that. Unconscious bias. The surgeon was the mother. But 10 people, didn't get it. And there's something you can practically do. Just download an app called Implicit Association Test, Harvard University. Just search for that, IAT. Implicit Association Test, and it will test you. It takes 5 minutes on your unconscious bias between women and career and family. And unfortunately, 80-90% of you here will find you have an unconscious bias that associates women with family and male with career. And that will include the women. And that's what we have to tackle, because we have to intentionally start including women, because if we don't, our unconscious biases will unintentionally exclude them.
Implicit Association Test, IAT, Harvard, if any of you didn't get that. So write that down. Okay, question down the front, then I'll just have 1 or 2 more if any of you have got them before we close. Yes?
Thank you. So I've been to many of these kind of events before in many different countries, and not that I'm sort of a career event goer by any means, but essentially I have to say this is one of the most, I think, innovative ones that I've been to, because I think that our panelists are giving really practical strategies. I mean, I think, this is a crowd that's pretty much convinced they're always sold out. It's a really hot topic, I think, for everywhere. But I did have a question. So last night after I put my toddlers to sleep at 11 p.m., my husband and I were having a glass of wine. I was reflecting on my career in advance of coming here. And I remember when I started out in investment banking back in New York, I was one of 4 female analysts in a class of 200. And, and then moving on, going up the ladder and working in global multinational strategy now in London. I'm a trailing spouse at the moment in Australia. You sort of see the same, that there are more women in senior or middle management positions, but really not enough. I was one of sort of 5 directors at HSBC in global banking and markets. So what I want to say, you've talked about strategies for incentives for flex time, part-time, hiring more women, but I also want to have your thoughts on mentorship, because at the end of the day, I think mentorship and sponsorship, and I've been very lucky in that across many different markets, many different countries, I've had the right mentors and sponsors who have pushed me or put me in the right areas to get.
Okay, we're going to take that because that speaks to Kate talking about retention, because the retention issue is a really big one. So the role of mentorship to retain women.
So look, I think that mentors mean different things to different people, and they mean different things in different organisations. And I think that mentors can take different forms. So, for example, personally, I think about having a board of mentors. For different reasons, they're good at different things, inside the organisation and outside. I think that's very different to sponsorship, however. And I think, sponsorship is about advocacy, not just around giving the individual advice and sharing experience, but also actively connecting them to other people, talking about them when they're not in the room, to people who matter, for informal and informal situations as well, and advocating for women. And actually, I think that's what makes a lot of difference. I think, to my mind, mentoring is something that you personally benefit from and can choose to act on or otherwise. But sponsorship is about other people talking about how great you are, or saying, I was in a room, with Kate the other day, and she did this thing, and that was out of left field, but she's really good. Maybe you should think about her, and then following through, including calling Kate and saying, get on their calendar and tell them what you just did. And sometimes, and again, sponsors sometimes they're managers, they're the enlightened leader who's aware of their leadership shadow, and they're also somebody else who might be structurally appointed to you through a sponsorship program. So we have a sponsorship program at our place, and it works well. I think both the women and the sponsors, who are men and women, get an awful lot out of it. But I think there is quite a difference between the two.
There's actually a study that we did across 4 of Australia's biggest companies at the end of 2013, interviewing 250 senior women, and we said, what's the one thing that matters? And the number of them that said sponsorship was more than double number 2. So it was the most important thing those 250 women had.
Important stat. Last questions. Yes, one here. Question here. Did we have any down there? Last question. One up there. I'll take 2 more questions. The one on this table and the one on that table. So, lady in the white. If the gentleman down there wants to stay down there. Yep, perfect.
Hi, Nolene Wolfe. So I was employed into my by my current organisation into a senior role on a 4-day-a-week basis, and I wanted to share with you my experiences the first day I arrived at work, where I met the executive team, and a man in the executive team commented on my 4-day-a-week basis and said, I'd love to work 4 days a week. To which I responded, why don't you? To which he laughed. So I suppose turning that into a question or a comment, it's my perspective that it will never be socially acceptable for a woman to have a senior role on a part-time basis until it becomes socially acceptable for a man.
I'm going to flick to the man who would have paid you 90% of your full-time salary.
That's right. So,
had you been working for him.
So the bit I didn't tell you is when we introduced that program, the first 3 applicants were men, actually, which including 2 of my partners, so 2 quite senior men.
So incentives.
But that took a little bit of the organisation saying, well, we didn't expect that. But you know what? It's one of the best things we've done. And now I'm actively encouraging men to take not just that form of flexibility, but we've got lots of others that pause the up or out or lots of things. And why is that? Well, first of all, obviously, because it's role modeling, because it's those men leading balanced lives, and that's all really good. But you know why else? The pressure our consultants, the travel, everything they go through. If we do not allow our men to have part-time and flexible work, we are stealing women from the workplace somewhere else. Their wives cannot work, essentially, because the job and the travel is too much. Unless we allow our men to go flex, and encourage it, we are stealing women from the workplace somewhere else. And that'll never show up in my WGEA stats or anything, but it's the right thing for the country, and it's the right thing, for our people.
Great comment. Great comment. Yes, now one in the middle, and then I will take the one down the back because this is really going well. No, just turn around. Yep, excellent. It's like remote controlling one of those little things. Yes.
Hi, my name is Gara. And I had two questions. I recently saw a woman that said that women don't get to leadership positions because of strategy. They don't know enough strategy. And I've had that said to me before, that you can't have the position because you don't have enough strategy, positioning, or you don't think about it. My first question is, what are the men doing about teaching women strategy in the workforce? And my second question is, do really women need mentors, or do they need the support in the workplace?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that goes to Rhonda. I'm interested to know as to whether they wanted to know about strategy in terms of the business or strategy in terms of getting ahead, because possibly they might have been two different things in that career strategy in that particular context. Who wants to take that one on?
I don't mind just quickly talking about, I think I touched on it about, making sure that women get exposure to those kind of jobs, do you know what I mean, that might, the hot jobs. I think we talked about, and again, the male champions of change, we talk, and part of it driven by the 50-50, if not, why not? But, why can't women who don't necessarily have the background but have got some core capabilities kind of go across, well, not just women, but men, which goes to your point, Rhonda, when we unpack merit and we unpack what jobs are, we might be part of the way there. But I think potentially part of what you're driving at is, how people are assessing what your background is and how does it go into the other role. And I think breaking out into different kind of roles where you're stepping across into a hotter job, where you may be perceived to be getting that sort of experience is probably key.
Rhonda.
I haven't seen the TED Talk, but I'm going to go and Google it now. The baseline of strategy would be something like IQ, and men and women are the same, complex problem solving, men and women are the same. So there's no reason why we wouldn't have just as good as strategy skills. In any job you can do strategy. You don't have to go and do the strategy job. In any job, I need to improve this, I'll make a strategy to do that. So practical skills. So I'm surprised at that, and I honestly don't know the answer because I don't think it's right. So maybe a career strategy, maybe Claire's point about, if you have got conflicting interests in your life, you're really trying just to keep the boat afloat as opposed to planning out the steps. But I would always say, and it goes a little bit to resilience and career strategy too, sometimes when we listen to the people at tops of companies or close to the top of a company, they tell us about their amazing career strategy. I always want to put my hand up and say, what rung of the ladder were you born on? Yeah. Because if you're born on rung 11 and you're just telling me how you took a step up to 12 at the top, it's an interesting story, but it's not particularly useful. If you find someone who was born on rung 4 or 2, and they're on rung 10, this is an interesting story. There's resilience in there, there's ambition, there's hard work, there's a whole bunch of good stuff. So I think we have to be a bit careful of those people that just go as their strategy.
One last question, which is at the back of the room.
Thank you, Claire, for acknowledging. Appreciate it. My question is around, there's obviously a lot of structural and systemic thinking going around how everyone should accept diversity in the workplace. In a number of male-dominated companies, there is a deep-seated skepticism about the entire approach. What can women in roles do to make sure that they bring the men along? Okay, bringing the men along. It's been an important issue. How do you bring the men along? Well, you've got lots of men down, well, they're all playing football. How do you bring them along? A bit like herding cats. No, sure.
Look, I think that's probably certainly one of the skills that I have drawn on in my career. I remember being told when I was at Qantas that you're odd. You do a fantastic job and you get the results. You just do it differently. Because I didn't bang my fist, I didn't stand up and yell at people. That just wasn't how I led teams. And by the time I brought stuff to the table for a decision, I'd brought the stakeholders on the journey because I'd gone and had coffees with them or talked to them and brought them on the journey to get there. It's no different with the gender journey. We need to, if it's one person at a time that we need to convince, then that's what we need to do. But I think, continuing the conversation is really important and, challenging it. And challenging, I had, this is funny, in an executive meeting the other day, there was no coffee. And one of the guys said to me, Suzanne, what happened to the coffee? I said, I know, you didn't give me one. But it's just his immediate, and he's a lovely, fantastic man. But his immediate assumption, because I was the only female in the room, was to ask me why the coffees hadn't turned up. So
He won't ask again.
He won't ask again. But I think we need to challenge.
Quickly from the other three before we close. John, what do we do to change the men or work with the men, influence the men?
I mean, it's a shame it's needed, right? Because the belief that men need to step up alongside women, that's what Male Champions is all about. We had something, though, that helped me a lot, which is reverse mentorship, where a junior, new starter graduate MBA was giving me advice. And that, by the way, massively improved my IT skills. I'll give you that as well. But this was a really important issue, and I found out what I had to do and what the expectations of women just starting in McKinsey were, much more clearly through that official program that legitimised giving me, what they really thought, than would have ever filtered up to me by the normal channels. So that's something you can think about, like reverse mentorship of your senior men.
Okay.
Again, if there was one single thing, I think we'd all be doing it. But, perhaps one thing to think about is, I think you need to have an emotional connection. To be passionate about anything, you need to have some kind of emotional connection. And so for some men, that is, they have young daughters, or they have daughters who are coming out into the workplace. For some men and leaders, it's about a commercial imperative, which is the idea is probably better if you've had different brains around it. For other people, it's the right thing to do. There's a whole heap of different reasons. So I kind of think that, again, one thing to think about is just pick them off one by one. Find out what's going to make them passionate about it. Educate them, and keep going. And it doesn't take care of itself. It's a day by day, decision by decision, mistake by mistake. Oops, I didn't mean that. Don't hold it against me. Let's move on. I'm coming from a good place type of exercise. And everybody's going to keep moving together on it, I think.
Which comes back to, Rhonda, the drivers that we have, and in the end it's really all about people. And we were talking earlier that in fact we have a lot to learn from our Indigenous people who inherited the land first, and really we don't think it's all about people sometimes, and we have a lot to learn around that, don't we?
I think if you're not working and listening to the story of the Aboriginal people, then do it, because they've got so many great lessons of leadership in there. And it is about collective leadership. It is a maternal culture, so it's got lots of really interesting ways of looking at how we lead. And to the question of how do you take people on the journey, one of the things that the Aboriginal people do so beautifully is this amazingly gorgeous sense of humour. And you can get away with so much more if you're funny and smiling than you can if you're mean and angry. So as simple as it sounds, one of the funniest conversations I ever heard was a very senior guy, and this person put their hand up and said, look, if you've got a 35% target for women on senior leadership, what does that mean to me? My career is over. And he just said, well, women make up 70% of our workforce. We're going to offer them 35% of the top jobs. That means the other 65 are up for you. And everybody thought that was really funny, but it was really right. And I think that's a way of doing it too, but I think the suggestions made by the panel are also really good.
Okay, look, I'm going to draw it to a close because we have had a brilliant conversation. As this lady here said, some really practical strategies, very open. I like to facilitate a very open panel. I think everything should always be on the table, because if everything is not on the table, then you don't know what you really want. So it's really important when you take these conversations forward and when you pick up all of these points, you put it on the table. And everybody here took some risks. John took some risks, you know, and he made some mistakes. And he said, I made some mistakes and I thought it was a really good idea, and it wasn't a really good idea. Oh dear, we'll move on to the next idea. And I think that's a really key element from this. Everybody made mistakes. We all make mistakes. And sometimes we just think we can't then take the next risk. And that's often really part of it. And that risk might be investing in someone else, or taking a risk on someone else, or taking a risk on a strategy. But there's a lot of really good practical points here. We really wanted this to be a conversation that was about innovation, about disruption, about thinking about things differently. I hope that that has been what has happened for you, and I'd just like all of you to join me in thanking Rhonda Brighton-Hall, Kate Aiken, John Lydman and Suzanne.
Hello, my name's Vanessa Harding-Farrenberg and I'm the other half of the Morgan McKinley Managing Director team. I'd also like to thank you. What a really honest and thought-provoking discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm biased because I am part of Morgan McKinley, but it was definitely one of the best discussions I've been privy to. Look, I think we do have a lot more work to do in this space, but there was certainly a whole raft of valuable ideas and practical ideas that I think we can take away. Some of the things that really resonated with me were our need to take our blinkers off when we're looking for high potential talent. We are missing a trick here when we're only focusing on a certain age group in the market. I think rethinking the way work is built is really important. It's up to us, and we're constantly talking to clients about how we can set up job descriptions and design job descriptions in terms of thinking about chunking it down and dividing up the week and thinking about the outputs that are attached to it. I love, Rhonda, your point about giving more information and more support to those first and second time managers who are responsible for decisions that are ultimately going to change or have an impact on their quality very early on in someone's career. And finally, just changing our mindset in terms of what great leadership is. I think there's a lot to be done there, but I think it's going to take a lot of work to figure that one out. And finally, John, I loved your reverse mentorship. I think particularly in organisations which are very hierarchical, I think sometimes that feedback just isn't getting back to the top. So I think that's a fantastic idea for senior leaders to take away. So look, I'd just like to have you join me again in thanking the panel for a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much. I'd now like to acknowledge two organisations that Louise, myself and Morgan McKinley are very proud to support, and that is Odyssey House and Dress for Success. We've been working with James Pitt and his team at Odyssey House for the last few years, making a very small contribution towards helping them continue to be able to provide, you know, the great and very important services they do to people who are drug and alcohol dependent. And James, I'd love to ask you just to join us to say a few very short words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for staying. I envisaged that once the panel finished, that everybody was going to head for the hills. So, you know, I know that you're anxious to get back to work on a Friday and do all the, you know, and implement all the diversity and things that we've been talking about. Sometimes I'm used to this situation where you're speaking at a conference and either you're the last person or whatever, but I'll certainly try to give it my best shot. Odyssey House is an organization that's been in operation since in Australia since 1977, and actually originated in the United States in 1966. The program started here because a Sydney businessman named Walter McGraw lost his son James to a heroin overdose. And Walter made a commitment that he was because at the time when James was experiencing those problems, there were very few services to assist. And Walter made a firm commitment that he would start an organization to assist other people who had the same problems as James did. The program is designed for people who have serious alcohol, drug, and gambling problems. So it's not the kind of organization where somebody's smoked a joint or whatever the case may be. These are people who have a very entrenched background of antisocial behavior and serious problems. In our profiles, when we've done work to look at who comes to our service, that most of the people who come to us, or by the time they get to us, they've had 9 previous attempts at treatment. So that they run the gamut of, counseling, outpatient services, methadone treatment, things like that. We run what we call a therapeutic community, so that it's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation in which people live together and work together to try to overcome some of their difficulties. You say, well, what is rehabilitation? Rehabilitation is exactly what the word indicates, to try to restore someone to the former state of operation. The program focuses on individual accountability and responsibility. So we understand that everybody has a reason for their drug use. They have a reason for the difficulties they may have experienced. But one of the things that the program is designed to do is to cut down on the excuses that people have so that they don't continue to use that as a reason. We have a number of programs. We have a program for parents and children. So one of the things we found in the time that we've been operating is certainly that one of the difficulties for parents who come into our program is that their own backgrounds and the contribution to their own drug use has played a big part in how they've been parented. And so the Parents and Children's program is really designed to try to cut down on that multi-generational aspect. What do we do in a short period of time? We save money. So that one of the biggest costs to society for people who use the program is their illicit drug use and also their criminal activity. While people are in treatment, there's no illicit drug use and there's no criminal activity. We save society from the standpoint that when people come into the program, they make gains as far as their mental health is concerned. They make gains as far as their general health. They take less chances as far as what we call risk-taking behavior, sharing needles, things like that. So overall, the program is one in which we do the best that we can. There's always the specter that we're going to continue to have to battle to try to provide services. And one of the difficulties that all of us have is that we have far too much work to do, and we certainly don't have the resources because drug addicts don't vote. And so consequently, there's not a lot of lobbying, to try to assist us in our endeavors. I'm glad that you stayed, so that at least now you had, how many of you had heard of Odyssey previously? That's not bad. Actually, I'll tell my board that on Tuesday, that we have good market share. So now, a lot of you do. Certainly, we are always looking for assistance, and not just monetarily. Certainly, I want to thank Morgan McKinley for their support over the past 2 to 3 years. Even though they said it was a small contribution, that every little bit hurts. And as always, the way that I end most things is say that while we alone must do it, we can't do it alone. Thank you.
Dress for Success obviously is really well connected to some of the discussion that we've had today. You'll notice on your, not credit cards, on your USBs, that there's some information there. We're actually going to be doing a corporate attire drive. So if you would have some clothes that you would like to pass on, we will actually arrange to come past and pick that all up and do a big drop-off for Dress for Success. So some details and information are on that card for you. that probably concludes everything for our event today. I think just again, I'd like to thank our wonderful panel. Claire Braun, what a fantastic chair, absolutely brilliant. Rhonda Brightenhall, Kate Aiken, John Lydon and Suzanne Young. Thank you very much.